Vote for You, My Dream for Us, a Political Fantasy by Diane Johnson. Prologue. Here's a question for you. What sense does it make to give someone the power to cast a vote that is 620,000 times more powerful than any represented individual in the nation, and then restrict that vote with laws imposing fines and or negation of a vote if the vote isn't cast in favor of an associated party? Why give someone the power to vote at all if it's hindered by restrictions? Restricting the votes of the Electoral College by fines and negation of the vote is an unjustifiable offense against what inherently defines us as a free country. If the president's singular job is to protect the Constitution, it would appear someone failed. This seems like a constitutional right to me, and shame on the states that allowed laws restricting the votes of those in the Electoral College. Our singular right ordained by God is the power to choose our responses to circumstances around us. The good news is we can still make a difference in the upcoming presidential election. I present here two petitions, one for the voters in general and one for the Electoral College. To the voters, pray regarding your vote. God will guide you, and then vote. To the 538 members of the Electoral College, be brave and strong. Vote for the voters, even if consequences follow. Your vote equals 538 to 333 million. That's power. Your vote is 620,000 times more powerful than the voice of any individual member of our nation, and 300,000 times more powerful than any individual voter. We trust you will use that power wisely and in consideration of the nation you represent. Your state owes you the same confidence and should allow you to vote however you see fit. To insist otherwise seems like blatant malfeasance. Chapter 1. Something About Dreams. A dream I just had. Sunday, the 28th of April, 2024. I dreamt I was in the basketball court of a neighborhood chapel. It was a chapel where I felt I belonged, but I didn't recognize it physically. We'd been living in the chapel because outside was crazy and dangerous with apocalyptic chaos. Inside, there was safety. Inside, everyone was in this immense hall performing various joyful contributions. Everyone was sharing their skills and talents. Some were painting art, some were dancing, others were planning buildings and projects, gearing up for the arriving renewal. Others were forming fascinating, useful wooden and metal tools by hand. A microphone was being passed around, and a young man sang a beautiful song. Then the gentleman in charge said, "Pass the microphone to Sister Johnson next." I felt thrilled at having been recognized, but at a loss of what to do with the microphone. Someone told me to sing a song. I said I'd love to because I love to sing, but I couldn't remember any music, though I have several hymns memorized. Then someone suggested I dance. I said I'd love to. I love to dance too, but I'm feeling pretty fluffy right now, so I'm definitely not going to dance. Then I told myself, I do know what to do. I'm going to bear my testimony. Bearing my testimony is actually my favorite thing to do, more than anything else. It was short, probably the shortest testimony I've ever borne. I said, before I came to earth, I was scared. I didn't want to come to earth. I had a conversation with Heavenly Father. I told him I was afraid to come because I didn't want to mess things up or make mistakes. He reminded me the Messiah would bear those burdens for me. Recognizing that gave me the courage to come here. I'm so grateful for my Heavenly Father and my Savior and their sacrifices on my behalf. I love them both more than I can say. In the Savior's name, amen. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke. I felt the warmth of their love. When I finished speaking, I looked around. Everyone was still working on their various projects. It was kind of noisy too, and I realized that it was quite likely that not one person had heard a word that I had said. At the same point, I realized that it didn't matter whether anyone had heard me. I knew that they had heard me, and that was all that mattered. Retelling this story is that moment for me. If no one hears me but heaven above, I will have borne my soul, and nothing else matters. My father once told me, it is impolite to speak of politics or religion at the dinner table. I didn't understand why, but he clarified. Either topic during dinner is likely to give us indigestion. On that note, the title of this story is manifestly political. After sharing my first dream, it is also obvious that there is a significant element of religion here too. If you are eating, you have duly been forewarned. I would love it if you would keep reading and listening, knowing that I stand here before you with the desire to witness of God. I would also love it if you would join me in a political miracle. After I share some of my story and some of my faith with you, I'm going to share a political and spiritual fantasy with you. The thought of it buoys me up in times of trial and makes me smile. It is admittedly completely ridiculous, and if it were to happen, it would absolutely be nothing shy of a modern-day miracle. That having been said, I want you to know up front that sharing this fantasy of mine is a walk of faith. I tend to feel nervous and embarrassed relatively easily, and I know that sharing these things will potentially set me up for an unbearable amount of ridicule and criticism. If by some extremely slight chance this ever gets a single reader or listener, nevertheless, I get so much joy out of rehearsing the possibility in my mind that I guess I've gotten to the point that I hope at least one person besides myself might also get some joy from playing pretend with me. I think it is important to put my intentions up front. The fantasy towards the end of the book will better illustrate winning the U.S. presidency, 1, without registering as a candidate, 2, without campaigning, 3, as a last-minute write-in, and 4, in an overwhelming sweep of each state, both with the popular vote as well as with the Electoral College. Some state laws impose fines or negate the votes of some members of the Electoral College who don't vote with their party. That fact compounds the fantasy of this dream even more dramatically. But this isn't about me. It's about us. It is about the fact that in God we trust. The best thing about this is I'm not dreaming about this for some kind of self-gratification or aggrandizement. There's not a single thing about me that I have to brag about. In fact, quite a large portion of my life has been a significant anti-shame exercise. Truly, there's so little of me to offer the presidency as a single human being. There's literally nothing left but my faith in God and what He can do for our country as we unite together in harmony. There isn't one person in our nation that I wouldn't most likely vote for other than myself. If we were to compare resumes, I know I would most likely vote for you. This is about us, and that's what is beautiful. Guiding this country's a team effort. A presidency is influential, but true success in a nation is accomplished only when united efforts take place. It is our collective effort that makes this country wonderful. Our country is wonderful because of each of us working together towards positive outcomes. What I hope we would all be voting for this fall is for the Lord to show His hand in this election. As we express our faith in Him, He in turn will pour out His blessings, confirming His faith in us. I get excited when I think about a united effort sweeping the nation and carrying us all across that border of this fallen world into one that is blessed with miracles that have been promised and hoped for through thousands of years and by multitudes of God's people. I know this dream isn't singular to myself. This dream is a bid for your refreshed faith in both God and humanity. Call me Pollyanna, but we all have way more to look forward to than we can even comprehend. Despite the prophesied doom that is destined to come, see Revelations, more on what we have to look forward to in chapter 13, Mother Earth is ready to give light. Now that my writing of this dream for us is complete, I celebrate the culmination of a project I felt compelled to get done for 52 years. Looking back, I realize I was 4 years old when I first felt there was something specific I would be privileged to do in this life. Here it is, and I can't deny the intensity of what I'm feeling right now. Finally, I have a clarity of mind that lets me know I'm at the end of a waiting period and the beginning of a time where I might actually be able to focus and speak my heart in a coherent way. I've not only longed for this moment, but I believe getting this written and putting it out there is just a small part of my reason for being. I've tried in a dozen different ways to start writing this story. I thought about writing in third person or using the royal we, but neither feels right. And the long and short of it is, I take pride in being down to earth, and I have nothing but myself to share, and that has to be enough. At the beginning of 1999, I had a series of nightmares. I'd had 3 nightmares, each 2 weeks apart. We had moved an hour and a half, 70 miles away from where my parents lived in Haley, Idaho, to Twin Falls, to cash out our home and pay off some debt in hopes our finances would improve. It wouldn't really work. My belief is it wasn't meant to. There was a lot going on that hindered the flow of abundance we might have otherwise experienced. We'd been in Haley for 7 years and would be in Twin Falls about the same amount of time before my first divorce would occur at the end of a 20-year relationship. Back to the nightmares. The first nightmare was a viewing of 3 events in my life where the Lord showed me His hand intervened and saved me from physical demise. The first event occurred when I was 3, the second event occurred when I was 4, and the third event occurred when I was 16. The first event involved a group of teenage boys in a shed near my home in Laie, Hawaii. I was born in Kahuku as my father was a chemistry professor at the Church College of Hawaii. I'm guessing I may have been born with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome because I had what I was told were double-jointed hips. I'm not going to say anything more than that about the first part of this first dream, as I don't think it's necessary. Let's just say after reliving the following 3 events in this first dream, I woke with searing heat in my chest, palpitations, and I had to catch my breath as the words, "This really happened," whispered in my ears along with the reassurance, "You were saved for a reason." My highest priority in this life has been helping God give my 9 biological children their mortal lives. Beyond that, this purpose I've been talking about that seems to be coming into fruition has mainly remained nebulous. And that's okay, because beyond my contribution to my family, there can't possibly be a more important reason for the Lord to have saved me from harm and danger. I will say regarding the first part of this first dream, it horrified me. It shook me so badly I got in the car and drove an hour and a half straight to my parents' home to see if they remembered or could verify anything I had seen. They had no recollection of anything having ever happened. I, on the other hand, am not unconvinced that it was real and that I was truly prevented from experiencing greater harm than what happened. It also explains why every time I heard the children's rhyme, "Georgie, Porgy, Puddin' and Pie, kissed the girls and made them cry," I would always imagine that shed near our home in Hawaii. The second event in the first dream was one I did remember, even though it occurred when I was only 4. We were living in Mesa, Arizona, where my father was pursuing a PhD in educational technology. A slightly older neighbor girl had asked if my older sister, Kay, and I could accompany her to a mini mart a few blocks away to buy some candy. Despite some trepidation, my father allowed us to go. To get there, we had to cross 4 lanes of traffic with a median in between. We purchased our candy, and on our way back, we made it safely across 2 lanes of traffic and to the median. We got stuck in the middle of a busy street with nowhere to go when our little companion screamed at us to run, and she took off, leaving my sister and me standing on the median. In a split second, I did a quick assessment of whether to stay safely with my 6-year-old sister or to follow the commands of the 8-year-old who must know better because she was older. I chose incorrectly and ran as fast as my legs could carry me. I have a very lucid image of my right foot reaching up to the safety of the curb, and then nothing but blackness. I had been hit by a car, likely moving around 35 miles an hour, and I'd been knocked 14 feet like a rag doll. This was a very obvious near-death experience in every sense of the word, except for the fact I have zero recollection of any events on the other side. The only memory I have that has stayed with me was an intense disappointment in the hospital when I came to. I had cast on my right arm and a bump on my head, but no other obvious wounds. I looked up into the face of my lovely mother, who was cradling me, and I thought, I'm back. Tempered by the following thought, at least I have my mom to hold me. And that was my comfort at being brought back to the challenges of this life. At least I have my mom. The third event in this first dream of literal near-death experiences was one I totally remember, but honestly had no clue the danger I was truly in until it was pointed out to me in this dream. I was a Rotary International Exchange student, chosen by the Untitled Chapter, and headed to Belo Horizonte, Brazil. I was 16, and thanks to a delay in my visa, I was traveling alone. I was decked out in my lovely blue blazer, bedazzled with a few pins I'd traded for with flat plastic dimpled brown blobs meant to look like Idaho potatoes. I'd exchanged them for lovely emblems like Japanese cherry blossoms and red Canadian maple leaves, among others from various parts of the world. My favorite pin was our American flag. I felt proud to represent our country. It was a long trip with several legs. I still remember the excitement of getting on that Horizon plane at Sun Valley Airport and waving goodbye to my mother. I flew to Seattle, where I stayed overnight, and my brother Dave and his wife, then on to Denver, and from Denver to Miami, where I had a 4-hour layover. It was the leg from Denver to Miami that presented the moment of danger. We'd just arrived in Miami, and I was ready to disembark. A man in his early 40s motioned me to wait because he wanted to talk to me. He waited until nearly every other passenger had left, and I wondered, what could he possibly want to know? "Where'd you get so many pins?" he asked. I'm sure I raised my eyebrows at the seemingly random question, but answered politely, "At a Rotary International Exchange Student Conference in McCall, Idaho. This really isn't that many. Some of the students' blazers are full of pins." "Oh, I'm sure you'll get more. Have you ever been to Miami before?" "I've never really traveled anywhere like this before." "Really? How long is your layover?" 4 hours. "Oh, wow, that's a really long time." "Well, you can't come to Miami and not see it. You should let me show you around. You can't possibly want to sit in the airport for half a day. Let me at least take you down to see Miami Beach. Then I'll bring you right back, and you'll have plenty of time to catch your plane." "Well, I suppose, if you're sure I won't miss my flight." "Oh, I promise. You can trust me. I'll have you right back." Unbelievably, it wasn't until I was in the car rental place that I started to have a sinking feeling in my stomach and asked him to take me back. He'd started hinting at me coming to his place for a swim, and he could buy me a swimsuit, and I could stay the night, and he could call my host family and let them know I'd be a day late. "I really need you to take me back. I don't feel good about this." "I've already paid for the car so you can see the beach. The least you can do is go see the beach." I offered up a desperate silent prayer. I acknowledged my stupidity, and I took responsibility for my current plight. I knew I didn't deserve to be rescued because I got myself into this situation, but please, Lord, help me. As quickly as I uttered that prayer, I inexplicably felt the presence of a giant man standing behind me with a huge flaming sword in his hands, which I couldn't actually see. It was then I started feeling semi-safe again. I continued praying while the man from Denver took me to the beach, took 2 pictures, drove me back to the airport where he let me out, and sped off. I walked into the airport and breathed a huge sigh and teary-eyed prayer of gratitude and relief. I never spoke of the incident to my mother until after I got home from Brazil. Based on the message that came with this dream, I know the Lord truly did save me on these 3 occasions. I know He has saved me more often than that, and I'm sure there are times I may not have even known it. Those were the 3 instances which He chose to show me in this first dream, along with information that He had saved me for a reason. I refer to the dream as a nightmare because it frightened me to my core to realize I had come so close to my demise on these occasions. At the same time, at that point in my life, the fact that the Lord had chosen this moment to show me I had been redeemed from these otherwise inevitable outcomes left me pondering. My family is all but complete. What else could I have possibly been saved for? While this first nightmare looked back on my life and showed me the Lord's love for me and miraculous intervention in potentially devastating circumstances, the second and third nightmares in this series ended up being views of a time years in the future. The last of these literally kept me looking over my shoulder for weeks. It turns out that while they horrified me in the moment that I dreamt about them, in time they became a reassurance that I was where I was supposed to be after the details manifested themselves in my life. I've often felt when we have déjà vu moments in life, that's exactly what they are, a reassurance that we are where we're supposed to be when they happen. I will tell you the gist of the second and third dreams now. Dream number 2 in the series seemed both good and bad in what turned out to be a metaphorical way. It was good because I was working with some people to help children and adults with special needs. There were 2 people I was forced to work with, however, whose behaviors were malicious and manipulative for some warped sense of having control. They were twisting data and were mechanistically cruel and judgmental of those they should have been helping. They treated them like slaves and objects incapable of feeling pain. They tortured both those whom we were trying to help as well as those of us who were helping. They were demanding and strict and hateful and actually kept us from truly liberating and empowering these people blessed with neural divergences. We and the people we were meant to be serving were all kept in a chamber underground and forced to work like worthless grunts. I came to understand this as more of a metaphor than actual circumstances. I asked myself why I or anyone would want to work under such oppressive and suffocating conditions. Instinctively, I knew we were there ultimately to help those who couldn't help themselves. From underground, I looked through the cage and saw a smiling, blonde, maternal-looking woman on a balcony above ground. She was looking out over this gorgeous, pristine, green garden-like estate. She was the benefactor of this project. I felt she really cared, but she couldn't see what was happening underground, and we couldn't get her attention, and we were hushed when we tried. I understood that at some point she would find a way to break the chains of those needing our help. Our sacrifice and patience underground was worthy until she could find the key to our freedom. There appeared to be something about the timing. We had to keep working in the sordid conditions until the right moment arrived. I was told the blonde woman needed me to be her friend, though I'm not sure what that means. I think it means that together we could accomplish much good. I got excited and wanted to start right away, but was told again the time was yet to come. As I turned to walk home, I asked what her name was and was told Jalynn Prince. I thought I had made up a stately and perfectly descriptive name. 17 years later, my second oldest son and I were hired to work for Madison Fields Farm. The gentleman who hired me, James Baird, is a servant of God, now ministering on the other side of the veil. I will tell the story of coming to work at the farm in Chapter 9, A Step into the Dark. The purpose of the farm is meant to serve those with neural divergences. It took me several months before I started to connect the dots between that second dream and the reality manifesting on the farm. Portions of that dream have come to fruition. Other parts have not. No aspersions are meant to be cast on the farm, but a red tape of sorts does seem to linger some in the admin. I was also shown the town where I would be working, including hillsides, chapels, forests, the village, a train track running through it all, and a purple home with a sinking run-in shed in the middle of seeping groundwater. It was all very lucid. The greatest heartbreak and tragedy of this dream is that I had walked away from my family, including my two youngest. It horrified me to think I would do such a thing, and I couldn't understand the reasoning. I tried to reassure myself with the knowledge that I had given the children life. This was little comfort to me, considering my core experience is that nothing is more tragic and painful to a mother than to be separated from her children, or children from their mother. The only thing with power to separate me from my babies was to save the lives of my two oldest children, though they were already adults. And this was the case. It was what I was meant to do. It is what I did. I literally wept morning, noon, and night for over a year at the pain of the separation from all of my children, adult and young alike. I still have moments I weep at the thoughts of these times. The third nightmare in the series was the one that kept me looking over my shoulder for weeks after I dreamt it. I dreamt I was in the middle of a forest, just outside a field where there was a school. I was naked and curled up in the fetal position, embarrassed and hiding in fear, trying to cover myself with a pile of fallen leaves and dirt. Along came a tall, almost skeletally skinny, but extremely strong gentleman, also naked, whose name I heard but can't remember. I hid my face in the ground and curled myself up, even though, as he came up and curled myself up tighter as he came up behind me. He picked me up as easily as if I were a baby and carried me off. At the time of this dream, I was still married to D.A. The thought of being carried away by another man to whom I was obviously not married, both of us naked, shocked me to my extremities. I only ever wanted to be righteous and obedient and safe in my temple covenants. The horror of the feeling of having someone come up behind me in such a vulnerable state, pick me up and carry me off was so real in that dream that it stayed with me and made me feel like I was being followed and gave me a prickling up the back of my neck for a very long time. I can actually still recall the feeling. At the same time, the story of meeting and marrying the love of my life feels very much like he found me huddled in a ball, needing to be rescued. Our relationship is a blessing and a gift the Lord gave to both of us. More on that miracle in Chapter 10. I could practice. By the way, while it may seem that these dreams could have influenced my actions, I'm not sure how to affirm the fact that they never did. I only ever recognized the ties to reality after the fact of their occurrence in real life. I know if there is truth in something, that truth will persist and manifest itself when it is meant to be manifested. There's never a need to try and force a foreseen event to occur before its time. I wish that meant all of my choices had no pain associated with them. If that had been the case, I may not have learned to have charity and compassion, or how deeply and thoroughly I rely on the Messiah and his saving grace. At the same time, I never sought out any of the above circumstances, as I truly believed them all to be nightmares and as such to be avoided at all cost. In the long run, they actually turned out to be confirmations and validations of experiences that were meant to happen for reasons perhaps still not yet totally understood, and with a greater impact than I could have conceived or planned by myself. Chapter 2, ESP, Pulpits, and Swearing Like a Sailor. ESP. I can't remember the specific details, but sometime after I was hit by the car, while I was still a 4-year-old baby, my brother Will said something to me that stayed with me. I still can't remember if it was me telling my mom that we had a little sister that still wanted to be born. Karen arrived 2 years later. I'm thinking it must have been something different than that. I'm not sure, really. I'm not really sure what I said, but his response was, "Ooh, scary. What, have you got ESP?" I tried to ask what he meant, and he said, "You can see things before they happen." Why is that scary? Is that bad? It can be bad. What if you see someone die before they die? Scary, huh? It kind of freaked me out. My mother tried to tell me there's no such thing as ESP and that he was just teasing me. It stuck with me, though, and there have definitely been times I've wondered about things that seem to fit the category of déjà vu. The trick to the rationale of déjà vu is some of those moments, like the lucid dreams I had 17 years before they happened, weren't just some faint, fuzzy recollection that a certain moment seemed slightly familiar. Those dreams were way more tangible and filled with emotions and specific details that were undeniable when they occurred. I've heard that some people who have near-death experiences feel as though the door to heaven is left cracked open, and if one were to try, one could walk back through with relative ease. As I wrote my stories down, I'm beginning to realize how many moments I've had in my life that do feel like I was peeking through a door tied to heaven, and I could just walk right through. Pulpits. I don't remember my trip to the other side as a 4-year-old, but I remember feeling impressed spiritually at a very early age, with a passion that only now, as I tell this, seems to finally have a sense of being fulfilled. I still remember rather shortly after the accident that I felt compelled to go to the pulpit at church and bear my testimony of Jesus. As a 4-year-old, it scared the snot out of me. But I remember how satisfying it was to face that fear and feel content in the effort, even at that very early age. Looking back on the accident, I remember worrying about the gentleman who had hit me. He was a doctor, and I remember my mother telling me he couldn't work for a really long time after it happened. I remember feeling a weight that my choices had caused him emotional pain. I remember crying for him. He had brought me a giant stuffed Snoopy dog while I was in the hospital that was as big as I was. It was about that time that my dad stopped going to church, too. It never occurred to me before, but as I'm retelling this, I wonder if my choice to run when I should have stayed with my sister hurt my father emotionally as well. Could it be his choice to stop going to church was to protect himself from pain I may have caused him at that moment? I doubt he would admit that, but it's an interesting thought that's never occurred to me until now. These things happened right about the time that I learned about baptism and the gift of the Holy Ghost. I wanted more than anything to experience baptism and have the gift of the Holy Ghost so that I could make choices in harmony with Heavenly Father's will for me. I desperately wanted to make good choices. I must have been a tiny Sunday school student when I heard Jesus' name. I remember getting so excited that I bounced up and down in my chair. In my mind, I was practically screaming, "That's him, that's him, that's him." Then about as quickly my heart sank when I was told I would have to wait until I was 8 years old to be baptized. I thought to myself, but I know now that I want to be a part of his church and have the chance to have his Spirit with me always. The good news is, and what I didn't fully understand, is that little children are already blessed and automatically redeemed by the Savior's mercy and his atonement. I had every good reason to bounce up and down in my chair with excitement at hearing his name and the good news of his plan of happiness. Swearing like a sailor. If you're a non-swearing sailor and easily offended, please take the reference to swearing sailors with a grain of salt. I could just as easily have said trucker, construction worker, airline baggage handler, this I knew from experience, or even fourth grade little girl, also from experience. I'm not sure how or why I ended up with a way too often filthy mouth. I don't know if it made me feel tough or savvy or who knows what, but with relative ease and flair, I would let the profanities rain, as long as my mom wasn't within earshot. I've heard that profanities come because of a limited vocabulary. I guess I still needed to work on that, especially in the thick of upsetting or disturbing circumstances. For instance, recently, in the inadvertent absence of a clave on my husband's chest port, and the fact he wasn't attached to what should have been a 24/7 lactated ringer, we were awakened in the middle of the night to a pool of blood soaking his chest and the bed. I admit it scared me, and I did swear like a trucker. From then on, we made sure we had the safety of the one-way flow valve of a clave. Anyway, back to the fourth grade little girl. Whatever the reason is, and whatever the trove of shocking words I thought were enjoyable to spew, the one that offended the spirit more than any other was my taking the name of my Savior in vain. I don't know if it lasted a full summer near my fourth grade year, or if it only happened a handful of times. What I do know is the Spirit corrected me and admonished me to stop using the Lord's name as a swear word, or form of shock, awe, or whatever, or in any other way other than in sincere form of prayer. I was told I wouldn't appreciate someone using my name in a hateful, angry, or disrespectful way, and that the Savior feels hurt when we use his name like a weapon, or without deference to the power contained in his name. At that moment, I tried to commit to respect his name more fully and consistently. Chapter 3. Diane, you're so vain. Another interesting thing occurred to me as a 9-year-old. After some time of my exercising respect for the Lord's name, a conversation occurred in which I felt an interesting education was transacted and a potential premonition was revealed. Since the event still hasn't manifested, some may think it would be open for debate. The good news is I'm not worried about it, nor do I feel any loss without its fulfillment. If it does occur, I will be the first to admit that the Lord must have a delightful sense of humor. Relating this tale is the one and only effort that will be made to let the stars align, or not. Either way, it is in the Lord's hands. The conversation and education were brief. It went like this. Diane, do you know the meaning of the name of the street you live on? I don't even know the name of the street we live on. Walk down to the end of the street and look at the sign. So I walked down to the end of the street and looked at the street sign. It says poke. What's a poke? Is that like polka dots or when you poke someone in the arm? No, it's not like polka dots. And to poke someone in the arm is spelled P-O-K-E. Well, I don't know what a polk is. What is a polk? The street you live on is one of a series. Each of the streets is named after a president. President of what? A president of the United States, where you live. For instance, Lincoln, Van Buren, they were presidents of the United States. Oh, okay. You know who Lincoln is. He helped abolish slavery. Okay, so who was Polk? Well, at the time he was elected, he was the youngest president yet elected. Really? That's pretty cool. Yes, it is. That's going to be you. What? The youngest president elected? No, you won't be the youngest president to be elected. You have something more important you get to do first. Really? Wow, so what do I get to do first? You get to be a mother first. That's so exciting. I've always wanted to be a mom. The first person I ran into, after chewing on this conversation and coming back from checking out some of the other street names, was my brother. Hey, guess what? I'm going to be president of the United States, but I get to be a mom first. My brother has a great voice, and he sang his response to me. You're so vain. You probably think the song is about you, don't you, don't you? He thought he was pretty funny. As a 9-year-old, I didn't really understand it. I felt a little misunderstood. From then on, I pretty much kept it to myself. I rarely told anyone else what I had learned until pretty much now. I did go to my mother and ask, "Did you know the street we live on is named after a president?" "Yes, I knew that." I didn't know that. Did you know President Polk was the youngest president ever elected?" "No, I'm pretty sure JFK was the youngest president ever elected." "Really? I don't understand. He said it was Polk." "Who said it was Polk?" "I don't know." "Ask your dad. Maybe when Polk was elected, he was the youngest, but JFK is the youngest that I know of right now." After asking my dad, he told me to look it up in the encyclopedia. We had a prized set of hardback illustrated Encyclopedia Britannica, an actual set of A to Z books, which took up 3 feet on our bookshelf, with paper pages and everything, for those of you who may or may not remember such things. With my father's help, I was able to confirm that yes, President Polk, at the time he was elected, was the youngest to that date. I found that interesting, and it confirmed the education I had received. Chapter 4. No Kissing Boys. I have to preface this story of mine with a story about my husband. When he turned 21, he had 21 girls that he had dated at his birthday party, and he kissed each one of them as they arrived for the party. I never dated that much at all. As a matter of fact, I went to the wedding of a friend of mine, Glenn Ames. His mother introduced me to his new bride as the other class virgin. That having been said, I did have a crush on a few boys as a child. My 6th grade crush was Chad Hope. My friendship with Chad provided another teaching moment from the Spirit. I'd been invited by Chad to come to his house to watch wrestling on TV. He had a beanbag chair in his room, and we would sit for hours and watch WWE, or whatever it was called in the 80s. Occasionally, we would rub our noses together in an Eskimo kiss. We also liked playing one-on-one Smear the Queer. I'm sorry, I don't know a politically correct term for that game. It was a football game meant for more than 2 people, in which the person with the Nerf football would get tackled. We would spend the afternoon chasing and tackling each other. While he was fun and I thought the world of him, our friendship ended abruptly one afternoon. He had invited me to go with him into his backyard. He climbed up onto his fence and told me to come look over into the neighbor's yard. I didn't want to. It seemed impolite to look over fences to me. "Come up here," he insisted. Okay. I climbed up into the corner of his fence and looked over. The yard kitty corner behind his yard was gorgeous. It had a huge weeping willow that would have been awesome for climbing, and more flowers along the house and fence than I felt like I had ever seen. It literally took my breath away. Then I heard, "Would you like to live there?" In my mind, I excitedly shouted, "Yes, I would love to live there." "You could live there with Dan Arders if you want. You will have a family. Sad things will happen there, but this could be your home." "Okay, what do I have to do?" "You need to stop kissing boys. You need to wait to date." I pondered that for a minute, then I turned to Chad and said, "Don't you wish your name were Dan?" "What?" he asked incredulously. "Dan and Diane, doesn't that sound good?" "Don't you wish your name were Charlie?" "I think Chad and Charlie sounds good." And that was pretty much the end of our friendship. Right then and there, I knew I needed to wait until I was at least 16 to date. Just before I turned 16, I met an exceptional young man named Gordon Hanson at a speech competition in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He was the student body president of Burley High School. He owned a paving business and his parents owned a cabin in Ketchum. Gordy taught skiing on Baldy during winter break. We corresponded for a while and he asked if he could be my first date when I turned 16. He had to drive nearly 2 hours to take me out. He would take me to extremely nice restaurants in Sun Valley and would open doors for me. He gave me a pretty high bar for what to expect from a date. By the time I got to college, I honestly believed if two people truly loved the Lord, understood the principle of forgiveness, then theoretically it shouldn't matter who one marries. I still believe that those are key principles to making a relationship last, but relying solely on being able to forgive may leave something to be desired in a mutually beneficial and long-term relationship. Chapter 5, DNA. When I was in 7th grade, during a health class, my teacher came to the topic of DNA, which, as you know, is the name of the protein that is the building block of the human body. No sooner had the term DNA been spoken, I excitedly thought, those are my initials. Then I realized, no, my initials are only DN, Diane Niedrich. I had not been given a middle name. Then I chewed on it and I thought, maybe I'll marry someone with the last name that starts with A. I wonder what that last name would be. Anderson? Scott Anderson? No. How about Arters? Yeah, that would work because I love art. I laughed at myself and how clever I thought I was for coming up with a great fictional name. I'd already forgotten the experience in the corner of Chad Hope's backyard. And what great initials for someone who's going to be a mom. I forgot both the experience in the yard as well as in health class until 6 years after I had married D.A., and we had been living in that very house for several years already, and sad things were happening. Having a recollection return of the DNA and corner fence experiences helped me endure the sadness for many more years. By the time things were said and done, the divorce was finalized right at 20 years after we had met. Thanks to him, I do have 7 beautiful children and 4 grandchildren. At this point, I can't help mentioning the rest of my children and bonus children and grandchildren. I have 9 biological children, 5 bonus, plus spouses, and 6 bonus grandchildren for a total of 14 children and soon to be 11 grandchildren. They all make the world a brighter place. I live and find joy in that reality. Chapter 6, Twins and a Black Hole. My second pregnancy was a multiple conception. I knew right away there was something different happening. My doctor confirmed it as well. Unfortunately, challenges on many fronts confounded us. I was expecting a boy and a girl. They were due in January. My first son, Jeremy, had come 2 weeks early, and twins often come a month early, which would have brought them to us in December. I was going to name them Nathan and Natalie. Their names mean God's gift and Christmas. I was excited and hoped they might even come on my father's birthday, December 17th, and be a blessing to his heart too. I lost Natalie, but I gave Nathan my father's name, Richard, for his middle name. My sister asked me if I'd had any impressions about possibly getting pregnant with twins again. I said, yes, but it will probably be 40 years from now. That didn't even make any sense. But that's what came out of my mouth. Then I said, or 10 years from now? If I'm going to pick a ridiculous random number, I might as well pick something that actually makes some sense. In my dreams, if it does happen, I'll have to be changed in a millennial way, and that likely will have been at least 40 years from then. Not totally impossible if we get to see the start of the millennium, which I'm sure we all hope will be sooner than later, right? Hurry back, Jesus. Not long after losing Natalie, I got really sick. but had no insurance to cover anything but pregnancy. I had a really high fever and was absolutely miserable on several levels. One night, during my anguish, I found myself in a dream touring BYU grounds with a guide. We went all over campus, looking at the various schools and buildings, and the Carillon Tower that played Come Come Ye Saints daily at the end of the school day. Then I came back to the front of my little apartment, and I saw a rainbow in the southern sky, all shades of gray, without any color in it at all. One of my favorite topics is Jesus' second coming. I don't know where it is written, but my neighbor had told me that one of the prophecies mentions the Messiah arriving during the year without a rainbow or rain or something along those lines. When I saw this gray bow, I thought for sure it meant the Lord must be imminently nearby. I got so excited about encountering my Savior, I started exerting myself and kicking my feet to get into the air. My guide tried to hold me back and said, "What about your husband and children?" I said, "I'm sure they'll be fine. I just want to be with Jesus." I started to rise up above our apartment. I headed towards the gray rainbow when all of a sudden it turned into a black hole and started sucking me towards it. I thought to myself, yeah, no, that can't be where Jesus is. I'm not going towards that. I turned my back on the black hole and started looking around below me to see if I could see anything that would lead me to Jesus. I looked down to the west and could see Utah Valley Hospital just a couple of blocks from us. I could see spirits hovering above the hospital. Most were white or shades of white and paid no attention to me. One was dressed in black and red and had laser focus on me and palpable hate and murder in his eyes. It felt as if an invisible barrier kept him from rushing at me to tear me to shreds. I decided to ignore him as it was obvious he wasn't Jesus. I turned towards the north, and that's when I saw the sweetest, most brilliant, billowing white clouds I'd ever seen. I knew then I had found him. It was him. It was him. It was him. I was so excited I started kicking my legs and speeding towards this heavenly place. As soon as I had gotten momentum up and could feel the rush and exhilaration of forward movement, I felt what can only be described as a giant hand that reached out and the quiet but urgent words, "Diane, stop. It isn't your time." Instantly, I felt myself falling and whooshing back into my body, where I awoke with a gasp. I felt intensely embarrassed. To calm myself, I started singing, "I Believe in Christ." Somehow, I knew every word, and then I even sang a fifth verse that mentioned the Lord's love for me, and I felt the Savior kiss me on my forehead. I wept and wept and wept. I was ashamed to feel that I had virtually willed myself to die. I begged for forgiveness and asked the Lord what He needed me to know. The answer was, "Diane, I love you. Remember, this life is precious." Before I met and married Dan Johnson, I often struggled with feelings of wishing I could be back in the Lord's arms. But remembering this experience helped anchor me to the beauty of just being. On that note, I think I will try to wrap the topic of 30 years, 9 children, and other marital associations into one fell swoop. I will do my best not to cast aspersions. Chapter 7. Asperger's, Beach Towel, Mother's Day Prayer, FedEx, and E54DC. Asperger's. One of my primary means of human interaction is to give people the benefit of the doubt. I believe there is more tender-heartedness in accounting a lack of compassion or broken boundaries in a relationship to a defect and mirror neurons than to a lack of character. I prefer to think that the end of a relationship with DA can be chalked up to Asperger's and crying on another's shoulders. I also want to acknowledge that both the entering and ending of associations served purposes. Please note, I do not recommend the practice of taking lightly the bonds of matrimony in any stretch of the imagination. In my opinion, marriage is the honors course in life. It can be extremely difficult, but it is worthy of all acceptation, and success therein can be a source of true joy. The Lord blesses our efforts to work with a spouse to whom we are equally yoked in spirit and one heart. Being on a team is all I ever wanted, and it is a true team that I now have. The beach towel. In between relationships, I went to visit my cousin in California. We spent a few days at the beach. I wandered along the pier wishing I had money for the lush and colorful beach towels hanging in the windows of countless shops. Returning home to Idaho, I would travel every weekend to see my son Nathan, who was receiving care in a town 2 hours from home. One day, shortly after my trip to California, I was literally driving out in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, and I saw a bright blue bundle on the ground. I drove past, but as I did, I thought it looked like one of the beach towels I had swooned over. I had been deep in the thoughts of how best to help my little family. When I got back to the bundle, I found that it was a beach towel and it looked brand new. It had large circles on it that were intertwined. It literally felt like a gift directly from the Lord Himself. Not only was the thought a source of comfort, the beautiful towel and its color, and the symbolism of the intertwined circles, was a reminder that not only was the Lord intimately aware of what I needed, He was also aware of what I wanted. In my heart, I knew that in time, the Lord would not only help me have what I needed, but He would help me have what I wanted in a marriage relationship, for my family, and in my life. I knew I would someday be on a real team. A Mother's Day prayer. A Mother's Day prayer. Mother's Day 2015 was a powerful day spiritually for me. I typically mourned Mother's Day. At least I had in earnest for about 14 years. 2001 was ugly in more ways than one. Michelle, my most admired friend and confidant, collapsed on Mother's Day while carrying her 6th child. Despite IV antibiotics, she succumbed to sepsis, along with her baby the following morning. I've always considered that she died on Mother's Day, a tragedy that pierced me like none other had to that point. When I met her, Michelle was president of the Arnold Air Society and lieutenant colonel in the Air Force ROTC at BYU. She had earned a slot as a helicopter pilot. She and her family moved into our apartment complex after her first child, Jessica, was born. Jessica was born exactly 1 month after Nathan was born. We took turns making meals for each other and watching our children, and we talked constantly of the challenges of being a good parent. Michelle became president of the local La Leche League chapter. She was extremely intelligent and always had a level head. She was compassionate and service-oriented. If I could vote for someone on the other side of the veil, I would vote for Michelle. She had her stuff figured out. I'd have given anything to be more of the mother that she was. Long and short, her example, my love for her, and her loss made my Mother's Days miserable, to say the least. So, 14 years after losing Michelle, I was taking Nathan to a gas station so he could buy himself a cup of coffee. As he went inside, I remembered something my seminary teacher, Donna Rose Rainey, had taught me. She was a beautiful woman inside and out, and her spirit taught me in ways that stayed with me. She was teaching us about prayer, and she shared a couple of examples that illustrated the power of visualizing the Lord while praying. Her stories involved 2 people who were dying, an old man and a young girl. Neither knew each other, but their experiences with passing on and finding peace through prayer were parallel. Both asked for chairs to be brought next to their beds. Both explained that they wanted a place for Jesus to sit while He comforted them. Both passed away with their hands stretched out and resting on the arm of the chair. I had often thought of this illustration that Sister Rainey had shared with us as teenagers. Here I was 30 years later, still never having fully tested the principle of visualizing Heavenly Father as I prayed. It was always much easier to imagine a messenger carrying my prayers to the Lord versus his having the time to speak directly with me. As Nathan was in the gas station, I knew my time was short, but I thought I would take a minute and at least try to visualize Heavenly Father sitting in the empty seat next to me. As I did, I imagined a hand reaching across the console. It opened, palm up, as if offering his hand to hold mine. I reached my hand out across where I imagined his hand was. I was surprised to feel in the middle of the palm of that left hand of his those distinctive marks of sacrifice made thousands of years ago on my behalf. This strong but gentle hand being held out welcoming mine with such warmth and love was more than my heart could fathom. I wept and wept and wept. As I imagined my hand being swallowed up in his, there was beauty and strength and tenderness and truth. A love radiated more tangible than any I had ever felt before. I basked in the lingering glow of that moment for most of the ride home, but I can still recall the feeling when I try. I reveled in that feeling as I drove back to where we were staying, out on flat country roads where one could see for miles around and with a speed limit of about 50. There on that quiet Sunday morning, with not a soul in sight, I chose to drive through a stop sign. As I did, a flock of sparrows flew up in front of me. My heart broke as I heard the crushing sound of several birds hitting my car. I started to cry again, tears streaming down my face. Why, Lord, why would you show me something so beautiful and then let me experience something so heartbreaking? What are you trying to teach me? I love you, Diane. That will never change. But I need you to listen carefully. Commandments keep you and your family safe. When I ask you to do something, I need you to do it. If you don't listen and do what I ask you to do, when I ask you to do it, people could die, just like those birds when you chose to ignore that stop sign. What have you asked me to do that I'm not doing? Without words being spoken, I knew what he had been asking me to do. For months now, I had been fighting the impression that my oldest children were in perilous circumstances and needed my help. I knew it meant drastic measures to get them the medical help they needed. I also knew it would mean the end of relationship number 2. FedEx and E54DC. Shortly after this Mother's Day experience, my imagination got the hold of me. I kept imagining our car getting hit by a Let me start that over. Shortly after this Mother's Day experience, my imagination got the better of me. I kept imagining our car getting hit by a triple-trailer FedEx truck and killing all of us inside. What was super weird about it was imagining that somehow, even though I died, I imagined I would be brought back from the dead, having had a chance to spend some time with the Lord and being able to bring back all kinds of wonderful instructions to share with everyone, like the Bible doesn't already have that. I knew I was letting my imagination get the better of me. I also began to imagine I would be given an enormous settlement from FedEx to compensate for the death of not yet ex number 2, and for suffering through months of coma and physical rehabilitation. Perhaps I imagined death being better than another divorce. I kind of wonder if imagining this tragedy of losing a spouse was a way of letting off feelings that I didn't know how else to process, and the fear of another marriage failure. The even more silly manifestation from that FedEx daymare was what I thought I might do with the imagined settlement money. I asked myself what I would do with a large sum of money. I've always known I wanted to help people. I even registered a nonprofit organization with some fundraising ideas, which I still have, but have yet to implement. As I asked myself what I would do if money was no longer an object, I was surprised to hear the thought, run for president. The thought literally made me laugh out loud. This enormously humorous thought took my mind off the things in my life that stretched my positivity muscles. Right around then, I had to buy a new car. Years before, in 2007, I bought a set of vanity plates. I had seen a license plate that had URLUVD on them. I really liked that. You are loved. I'm seriously into warm fuzzies. I thought I would try to duplicate it. I got plates that said YRLVD, which was meant to also say, you're loved. My brother Will looked at those plates and asked me, how come your license plate says YR livid? I laughed. He was right. It was imperfect. It made me laugh when I had to pull out in front of someone too, and I knew that was a legitimate question with an obvious answer. YR livid? I know why you're livid, because I just pulled out in front of you. Sorry. When I received the new plates for the car I had bought in the fall of 2015, I said a little prayer. I didn't have money for special plates, and I hoped for a message in the random ones being sent to me. Please let it be something in which I can find a happy message. I love reading license plates. Some are unintentionally funny, like 2FN2MS, which I read as too fun to miss. I wasn't disappointed. My plates had E54DC on them. In my mind, it read, elected in 50 states for Washington, D.C. I laughed so hard I cried. I laughed for nearly 2 hours. Tell me the Lord doesn't have a sense of humor. Then it happened a few months later in November. I got a call from Sarah Ivy, my only daughter, telling me Nathan had tried to kill himself. Many events had built up to that moment. Earlier in the year, he had been attending Job Corps. He'd been doing really well in his classes. He'd started welding and was training for the wildfire fighting team. His welding apprenticeship was the start of the end, though. Nathan had to leave the dorms at 5 a.m., and for whatever reason, the people responsible for Nathan's morning meds failed to get them to him before he left for work. After at least a week of not having his morning dose of medications, Nathan started to self-medicate with beer. Even though Nathan was over 21, the zero-tolerance policy took precedence over the fact that he had been medically neglected by their staff. With time on his hands, he tried to go with his brother on a 5-hour trip to go see his father. His stepmom wouldn't let him cross the threshold, put him back in the car, and drove him 5 hours back to Utah. Add that to Sarah Ivy's boyfriend giving Nathan grief as well, and not being welcome to my home by number 2. Nathan felt rejected by everyone around him with no reprieve. I tried to brainstorm with Nathan to help find a place for him to relax and reset his medications. It was December, and we found a place in San Diego that had a pool and seemed like a sunny environment and a great place to regroup. Very quickly, it was apparent he was not acclimating to the program. He kept cheeking and/or throwing up his meds. After 2 weeks, he was sent to a hospital. With help from my father, we heard about orthomolecular psychiatry. At that point, it was practiced primarily in Canada, but we had found a singular residential location back east. Starting in Haley, Idaho, I drove to San Diego, picked Nathan up, and then I drove him to the East Coast. The location had said they accepted our insurance. What I hadn't heard was they needed the out-of-pocket paid up front to the tune of $20,000. By the grace of God, my parents took an enormous chunk out of their retirement and helped cover Nathan's 3 months of treatment. Nathan was settled in his new program on his 26th birthday. I left in the middle of the biggest snowstorm of the season. It got so bad at one point that the snow on the highway was up over my wheel wells, and we were all moving about 5 miles per hour. My mother had paid for me to stay the night in a hotel. I got up the next morning to what looked like a semi-truck graveyard. I stopped counting waylaid trucks after about 20. It was eerie. I made it to Idaho by Friday, January 16th, 2016, for my son Joshua's wedding. I'm pretty sure someone else was driving for me by the time I got there. Jesus definitely had taken the wheel. 3 pivotal messages. For those next few months, Nathan seemed to be doing really well. The problem was I didn't have the resources to pay $6,000 per month to keep him connected with the new program. I also knew I wouldn't be able to duplicate the process without a major amount of resources, whether there on site or otherwise. I started thinking about finding ways to be there with him to help him continue the treatment program he had started. I prayed about it incessantly. One day at work, the thought came to me, check your phone. I thought that was weird because typically there wouldn't have been any messages that couldn't wait. After a second prompting, I checked my phone. My phone had a message from someone at church with a reminder that answers to questions could be found in General Conference coming up in the next week. It was a spark of inspiration. It occurred to me that it might be particularly meaningful to attend in person versus watching from home, as I did 99% of the time. Typically, tickets are gone relatively quickly, so attending remotely is usually the only option. I called my bishop to let him know I was interested in attending in person if he had tickets. He said he had tickets to the women's session coming up the next evening, but none for the general session. I said I would take 2 tickets, and I told him thank you. About a half hour later, he called back and said he had found tickets for the Saturday morning session. 3 pivotal messages at the conference confirmed my decision that I needed to help Nathan continue his orthomolecular treatment back east, no matter what it took. My first confirmation came during President Henry B. Eyring's talk during the women's session. In the following talks, I've highlighted in bold the words that reached out and seared my soul. 1. Trust in that Spirit which leadeth to do good, by President Henry B. Eyring, First Counselor in the First Presidency. You may have received a blessing tonight. This is quotes. Quote, you may have received a blessing tonight. For instance, a name or a face of someone in need may have come to your mind during this meeting. As he said this, Nathan's name instantly came to mind. It could have been only a fleeting thought, but because of what you heard tonight, you will pray about it, trusting that God will lead you to do the good He wants for them. As such prayers become a pattern in your life, you and others will be changed for the better. So with those feelings, the first thing you must commit to do is to go. As he said this, I knew he meant I needed to go help Nathan back east. And serve, knowing that you do not go alone. When you go to comfort and serve anyone for the Savior, He prepares the way before you. Time and again, President Thomas S. Monson has said he knows the reality of the Lord's promise. And whoso receiveth you, there I will be also. For I will go before your face, and I will be on your right hand and on your left. And my Spirit shall be in your hearts, and mine angels round about you, to bear you up. Doctrine and Covenants, chapter 84, verse 88. One of the ways He goes before your face is to prepare the heart of a person He has asked you to serve. He will prepare your heart as well. You will also find that the Lord puts helpers by your side, on your right, on your left, and all around you. You do not go alone to serve others for Him. The second message, I Am a Child of God, by Elder Donald L. Hallstrom of the Presidency of the 70. 5 months ago, my wife Diane and I went to Africa with Elder and Sister David A. Bednar. The sixth and last country we visited was Liberia. Liberia is a great country with a noble people and a rich history. Clearly, with spiritual direction, partway through his remarks, Elder Bednar stopped and said, "Do you know how firm a foundation?" It seemed that 4,100 voices roared in response, "Yes!" He then asked, "Do you know verse 7? Again, the entire group answered, "Yes!" The arrangement of the mighty hymn, How Firm a Foundation, sung by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir for the last 10 years, has included verse 7, which was not sung much previously. Elder Bednar instructed, "Let's sing verses 1, 2, 3, and 7. Without hesitation, the choir director jumped up, and the young Aaronic priesthood-bearing accompanists immediately began to energetically play the introductory chords. With a level of conviction I have never felt before in a congregational hymn, we sang verses 1, 2, and 3. Then the volume and spiritual power was elevated when 4,100 voices sang the 7th verse and declared, "The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not, I cannot desert to his foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never forsake." How Firm a Foundation came to be my anthem during this trip back east. The third message, That I Might Draw All Men Unto Me, by Elder Dale G. Renlund of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. A friend of ours in South Africa shared how she came to this realization. When Diane was a new convert, she attended a branch outside of Johannesburg. One Sunday, as she sat in the congregation, the layout of the chapel made it so that the deacon did not see her as the sacrament was passed. Diane was disappointed, but said nothing. Another member noted the omission and mentioned it to the branch president after the meeting. As Sunday school began, Diane was invited to an empty classroom. A priesthood holder came in. He knelt down, blessed some bread, and handed her a piece. She ate it. He knelt down again and blessed some water and handed her a small cup. She drank it. Thereafter, Diane had 2 thoughts in rapid succession. First, "Oh, he, the priesthood holder, did this just for me." And then, "Oh, he, the Savior, did this just for me." Diane felt Heavenly Father's love. Her realization that the Savior's sacrifice was just for her helped her feel close to Him and fueled an overwhelming desire to keep that feeling in her heart, not just on Sunday, but every day. She realized that although she sat in a congregation to partake of the sacrament, the covenants she made anew each Sunday were individually hers. The sacrament helped and continues to help Diane feel the power of godly love, recognize the Lord's hand in her life, and draw closer to the Savior. In indescribable ways, these 3 messages spoke to me and confirmed in my heart not only was the Lord intimately aware of my struggles and the struggles of my family, and to know how to support Nathan in his treatment, He was directing me to go. In Elder Eyring's talk, I felt my heart pierced with thoughts of Nathan, and I knew when he said, "Commit to go and serve," I knew that he meant what he meant, and I wept. Hearing my name in both Elder Hallstrom's and Elder Renlund's talks also spoke volumes. How firm a foundation became my anthem for my time back east. I memorized all 7 verses. I knew then, and I know now, he did this for me. I know he did this for my son as well, each of them individually. It is the child in need for whom we as parents each make sacrifices. Chapter 9, A Step into the Dark. No sooner did I start to express my intentions to meet Nathan to help him stay in his program back east. Fire seemed to rain down. Ex number 2 told me if I tried to take my 2 youngest with me, he would file an injunction. Virtually anyone else I talked to said there had to be a better way as well. A few weeks later, Nathan's dad bought him a plane ticket to fly him back home to me. He told me I should be able to duplicate what the doctors were doing for him back east. After having a picture of the Washington, D.C. temple show up on my computer for 3 solid days, I decided to put in a singular application for work at the D.C. temple. If I was offered the job, I would let that be my deciding factor. I'd tried to look for a place to stay, but felt like I was hitting a brick wall. I prayed about that, and the Lord said, "Remember, I go before you to prepare a way. I will provide for you, but you have to take that step into the dark." I had an image of a large forest of trees as the place where we would be staying. I didn't recognize that place I saw in my dream as the farm until after we had been there for nearly a year. Within days of Nathan arriving home, my brother Doug lost his son Jordan in a speedwing accident. Jordy was just a year younger than Nathan. He had been born with several debilitating health challenges. Despite his health challenges, Jordy had learned to love extreme sports. Doug and Jordy had spent hours the night before talking. He had told my brother that he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of not having lived enough. The next day, he went up on Baldy with a speedwing set for a spring ski. On his way down the mountain, he did a barrel roll with the intention of landing to ski the rest of the way down. The wind caught his sail and pulled him into a second roll, and he was way too low to make it all the way back around, and he hit the trees. The chapel and cultural hall were full of friends who came to honor him for his life celebration. Just about a month or so later, my brother Dave lost his son Aaron to a mishap with his medications. I'm pretty sure there's not much that a mom wouldn't do to save her children from either of these things happening if she could. In those few short months of Nathan being home, I had to take him into quick care a half dozen times and the ER twice, and he'd been cited for driving under effects due to changes in his routines and medications. All of that was compounded by his being forced to live alone, thanks to rigidity on the part of number 2, not allowing him back into our home. Right before I went up to Idaho for Aaron's life celebration, I got a call from the D.C. temple. I was offered that position I had applied for in their distribution center. Aaron's celebration was beautiful. While we were there, my oldest son Jeremy was wincing as he was trying to sit down. I asked him what was going on, and he said his wife had kicked him. I told him I had been offered a job in D.C. and that I was wanting to take Nathan back so he could continue with the orthomolecular treatment he had started. I asked if he wanted to come with us. He said he did. On the way home from Aaron's celebration, we stopped in Burley to get Jeremy's things. His wife came at him with a bat, smashing some of his things, and then called the police on us. The police caught up with us at the gas station, and after hearing our side of the story, they let us leave. We still didn't have anywhere to stay in D.C., but I took my last paycheck to pay for gas, and we headed out anyway. Leaving the 3 children who weren't yet over 18 was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I literally cried several times a day for a year. The recompense came because I knew in my heart I was doing what the Lord had directed me to do. It was like scrubbing a burn wound, except the healing wasn't visible. How different yet similar to treating brain cancer is the pursuit of mental health care. How unfortunate those with invisible health care needs have stigmas attached to them. When we arrived in Kensington, we found a chapel that was open at the Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Congregation Church. They made us feel welcome. We were able to take showers. Jeremy and Nathan took advantage of the coffee and donuts. We car camped in their parking lot for quite a while, like 2 weeks. We ate several meals at a soup kitchen, and I found it interesting that some of those also eating there actually felt compelled to explain to me that the soup kitchen was meant for the homeless. They seemed shocked when I told them that we were. We were very grateful for the hospitality we found so readily in the capital of our nation. Finally, we connected with my bishop, Steve Alfondre, and he helped us immensely. We were introduced to the Famoulis, who graciously let us rent rooms from them until Jeremy accidentally set their porch on fire, bless his heart, and bless theirs too. I wish we were still friends. They are the best kind of people. On my first day of work at the distribution center, my boss said, "You know this is a part-time job, right?" Hesitantly, I responded, "Yes. How many hours is part-time for you?" In my head, I'm thinking that means less than 32. 8. 8 hours? Yes, is that going to be okay? That's a little less than I expected, but we'll make it work. Actually, I'm pretty sure there may have been no conversation at all, and I simply burst into tears. At which point, extra work miraculously manifested until I found a new job. When I mentioned the situation to Bishop Alfondre, he said, "Well, I guess your full-time job is to find a full-time job." For the next several weeks, I spent every moment I could at the Kensington Library, in Rockville libraries, on the computers sending out resumes. The Famoulis lived in Rockville, and the library offered validated parking for up to 2 hours. On my last visit to the Rockville Library, I had been very frugal with my time, but for some reason, my validated parking stub was not letting me through the gate. I swiped it and swiped it and swiped it. You know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Finally, as 9 cars piled up behind me, a semi-patient parking attendant came up to me and said, "Give me your credit card." But, I sputtered. "Give me your credit card." I handed over my debit card, and he effectively took 3 of the $5 left in my checking account. I wasn't out the parking garage door before the waterworks started, and in the midst of my anguish, I remembered something. I knew my challenges were not quite as great as Job's, but I remembered how he had handled adversity. He thanked the Lord and sang him praises, despite losing his wife, children, crops, cattle, and during a major case of the hives. I did have How Firm a Foundation memorized, but at that moment, I couldn't sing it. I was only able to eke out "I'm not sure why, Lord, but thank you for whatever reasoning that had to happen. It hurts, but thank you, though I don't understand why." The next day, I mentioned what had happened to my boss. She was very kind and compassionate. "Why don't you use my computer after work? I'll leave my office open and we'll let security know you're going to stay. You're welcome to send out your resumes from here." It felt like a godsend. After work, I stayed and honed my resume to reflect administrative assistant work. Around 10 o'clock, Dave with security came through and stopped to see what was going on. I told him the story too. "There's a couple full-time jobs open in temple maintenance if you're interested." "I'd love that. What are the jobs?" "One's in housekeeping, the other is in grounds. Housekeeping is a graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The working grounds shift goes from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. That would be awesome. I've got tons of experience in housekeeping and would love cleaning the temple, but I've never done a graveyard shift and not sure I'd handle it. I've got plenty of experience on groundskeeping too, but I literally just tweaked my resume to show nothing but administrative assistant stuff. That's okay. Just throw your resume into an email and explain the experience you've had, and we'll call it good. Oh, that would be so awesome. Thank you. I'll do that now. I typed up a quick email explaining how I grew up in Idaho. I said my first job was doing yard work and I loved it, and I'm not afraid to work outside and would love a chance to be on the team and happy to do any task given: planting, weeding, raking leaves, shoveling snow, etc. As I got ready to hit send, I remembered Bishop Alfondre had asked for a copy of my resume, so I threw his name in the CC and hoped he would remove any comments about working outside before forwarding it to whomever he was going to send it to. Lucky for me, he didn't. I got a phone call less than 15 minutes later. Turns out his not altering the talk about Idaho was in my favor. Is this Diane? Yes. This is James Baird, LDS stake president for the Washington, D.C. stake. Hi. I was a little confused about whether the call was for church or something else. Bishop Alfondre just sent me your resume. I would probably have just tossed it in the garbage if you weren't from Idaho with experience working outside. I just started working for Madison House Autism Foundation on their farm, Madison Fields, as their GM. Would you be available for an interview tomorrow? I'm looking for a right-hand man. I would love to. Again, I wept like a baby, only this time it was for indescribable joy. Thank you again, Lord, for having to pay that parking ticket. It turned out that James hired both Nathan and me. Jeremy had made other relationships and was doing his own thing. We were able to live on the farm in what was called the milk barn. It was a whirlwind year. Chapter 10. I could practice. One of the things James did for the year we worked together was to tell me I needed to get out and practice, meaning practice dating. I can count on one hand how many people I dated before I married DA. Prior to marrying number 2, I went out with one other guy, and we only got together once while he was out on work release. Don't say it. I know. James' encouragement and guidance for dating was hard for me to accept. I couldn't figure out what I would do if I decided I liked someone and then had to unload all of the above and then some. It kind of felt like barfing on someone's shoes to me. I just didn't have the stomach for it. I told him if the Lord wanted me to be with someone again, he'd have to put me in his lap. Be careful what you tempt the Lord with. As the Lord would have it, the job at the farm ended and a position at the temple opened up, this time in the laundry. I filled out the HR paperwork on July 5th, 2017. I would work Tuesday through Saturday, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. My first Saturday was July 8th. July 8th, 2017 would have been Jordy's 26th birthday. Doug's family and my mom were going to the Twin Falls Temple for him that day. I got up early to join a temple session before work in order to feel a part of the family gathering as best I could, while they were in Idaho and I was still in D.C. I arrived in time for the 8 a.m. session. It was a quiet, sparse group. I sat on the left side of the front row, and Dan Johnson sat on the right side of the front row. Before the temple session started, the officiator came up to me and said, "It looks like we don't have any couples with us today. Would you be willing to be part of a witness couple with someone you may not know?" I said I'd be happy to. I was a little surprised, as I believed being married was requisite for being part of a witness couple, but I felt honored at the same time. After a brief orientation, we were led to sit down on the front row in the 2 middle seats. I looked behind me and saw what looked like several couples sitting together in the middle seats that are affectionately referred to as Lover's Lane. Not all temples have the same seating proximity, so it was easy to see that there were now couples who could have been asked to be the representatives for the session. I leaned over to my new companion and asked, "Do you think they'll change their mind about us?" We both shrugged our shoulders and smiled. He leaned towards me, held out his hand, and said, "I'm Dan Johnson." I smiled and replied, "I'm Diane," and thought to myself, "Another Dan. Lord, you do have a sense of humor." Our seats shared the same armrest. After once or twice brushing elbows and my getting goosebumps, Dan relinquished the armrest to me. I was a little disappointed. I rather enjoyed brushing elbows with him. At the same time, I was extremely impressed by his manners and respect for boundaries. At about that point, I stopped and took a good look at him. Yep, I thought, I could practice. He was my kind of handsome in more ways than one. After the session was over, I followed him into the Celestial room. I looked around until I found where he was sitting and asked if I could join him. He seemed a little surprised to see me, but smiled and welcomed me to sit down. We chatted for a while before I headed to work. I actually did mostly just listening, but what I discovered was refreshing. I was convinced that there wasn't anything I could tell him that he wouldn't understand or have compassion for. It was a beautiful experience. My duties in the laundry were spread across the clothing rental desk on the second floor and the laundry machines and folding areas in the basement. I had checked in, down in the basement, and was headed up the stairs for my turn at the counter. Halfway up, I ran into my new friend. "Hi," I said, smiling broadly. "Hi, I just left you a note at the clothing counter. I really enjoyed meeting you today." "Oh, good. I'll go look for it. I enjoyed meeting you too." More smiles. The note was short and sweet. He enjoyed meeting me, one of the best sessions he'd been able to enjoy in quite a while. Would I be interested in getting together again to go through another session? And his phone number. Woohoo! I called James immediately and told him what had happened. He was very happy for us. I didn't get off work until 10, and by the time I got out to my car, I figured it was too late to call him. It wasn't until the next day I realized I had left the note on the desk in the laundry. The temple is closed on Sunday and Monday. It took me until Monday to realize that even though it was closed, there is security staff all the time. By the time I had started working back at the temple, I was living in Frederick and commuting to Kensington. I had learned to drive as a 14-year-old in super small town Idaho. I like being alone on the roads, and if I could see taillights a mile ahead of me, I would groan because of traffic. If that hadn't been the case, I probably wouldn't have avoided the belt loop like the plague. As it was, I would drive an extra half hour to avoid the endless line of cars. The round trip to the temple took 3 hours. But it was worth it to go get that note from Dan. When I got to the temple, the guard was kind enough to escort me to the desk where I had left it. I was grateful. I called Dan before I even got back to my car. We set a date to meet again the next morning for another session, and lunch before I had to go to work. Believe it or not, we were asked to be the witness couple a second time. After I got off work at 10 p.m., I was surprised to see Dan waiting for me in the empty parking lot. We decided to go to a Denny's to grab a bite and continue our conversations. He was amazingly easy to talk to. While we were talking at Denny's, he gave me 2 lapel pins from Utah. I'm not sure why, but I was stunned. I knew then and there that his love language was gift-giving. I didn't know what to do with that. I couldn't relate at all. I'd grown up with an uncle who was a Jehovah's Witness, and they don't do birthday or Christmas gift-giving. My father, on the other hand, wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, but the being a bit of a minimalist as far as gift-giving goes may have come from his brother. I don't really know. All I know is that I felt like I didn't know how to speak the language of gift-giving. It kind of terrified me for more than one reason. He had a birthday coming up soon. That next morning, I got up and prayed about it. Lord, you know me. You know gift-giving is a foreign language to me. I give socks and pillows and dollar store toys for birthdays and Christmas. I really like Dan, and his love language is gift-giving. He's got a birthday coming up, and I'd really like to get him something. But I really need your help here. Not only are my finances iffy, as you know, but I wouldn't even know where to start. Would you help me out with some ideas, please? I'd really appreciate it. In Jesus' name, amen. I got up off my knees and headed towards my closet to get dressed for the day. Before I got halfway to the closet door, I heard, "The best gift you could give him would be you." I laughed. Oh, Lord, you really do have a sense of humor. I'm convinced of it now. I laughed all the way to the temple, where I've decided to participate in another session before work. The names for whom I'm officiating: Sarah, my daughter's name, and Johnson. Really? Okay, holy smokes. When I get to the celestial room, I sit and pray. Lord, you know I laughed this morning when I felt the impression about this gift for Dan's birthday. I felt your spirit again when I got the names for the proxy work. I appreciate that, but I'm going to need some help knowing that this truly is your will. Please confirm these feelings for me. At that moment, the feelings that filled my heart and the room around me were nothing shy of the feelings I had with my guide when I was headed north toward the sweet billowing lights of heaven in my dream at BYU. I felt an amazing, endless love come from our Heavenly Father for Dan, who he is, the challenges he has had, the great attitude and generosity he has. I felt the unconditional love Dan has for people, and the unconditional love Heavenly Father has for him, and how proud Heavenly Father is of him. I felt Heavenly Father's desire to pour out the blessings associated with a beautiful consecrated marriage relationship upon Dan because of who he is and how much the Lord had and how much love the Lord has for him. I felt very strongly that if we were together, it would be a blessing for both of us to fill our lives until our time is done on this earth and then some. Believe it or not, even after that vast outpouring and the tears of joy I shed at being filled with such intense and tangible confirmation, I again expressed my gratitude. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to have heard that manifestation, and I hope you will forgive me for pushing the issue, but would you please be willing to give me one more validation that what I am hearing is true? On occasion, you have given me random scriptures that have blessed my life and answered questions for me. Will you please guide my hand to find a scripture that will confirm what you are suggesting? Please. I would be eternally grateful, I'm sure. With that, I picked up a set of scriptures and opened to and read the following. 3 Nephi, chapter 12, verse 12. For ye shall have great joy and be exceedingly glad, for great shall be your reward in heaven. Again, I was overcome with joy and I wept. That was Wednesday. Dan and I met again on Saturday, July 15th, for another temple session. We both got there early and were ushered into a very full group, and we were sitting in the back, but managed to get seats together. I leaned over to him and said, "Which session is this?" "Why," he asked, "did you want to be the witness couple again?" His question caught me off guard. I thought, that would have been awesome, but no, I'd been planning on arriving early for the 9 o'clock session so we could visit a little bit beforehand. But I realized we had been ushered into the 8:30. Before I could come up with an answer to his question, he told me to hold tight and wait until the lights went out for the video presentation so as not to disturb anyone when we got up. When we got outside, a lady officiator came to where we were sitting on a couch outside the presentation room. "Is anything wrong?" she asked. "No, we were just hoping to be the witness couple," Dan says. I'm thinking to myself, but I can't deny thinking it would have been nice. My thoughts continue. It is a nice thought. It would definitely validate what I'm getting ready to share with him. He had no idea yet of the gift Heavenly Father had in store for us for his birthday. About 15 minutes later, a gentleman comes up to us. He asks if we are going to be in the next session and would we be willing to be the witness couple. We look at each other and grin and say, we would love to. When we arrive in the celestial room after the session, the coordinator comes over to us and says, "I want you to know that never happens. When people ask to be the witness couple, we usually just ignore them. Based on the Spirit, we took your request to Temple President Colton. Based on the Spirit, President Colton invited you to be the witness couple. We looked at each other and shook our heads and grinned. After that, it took me a minute to compose myself and get up the nerve to tell Dan what I had experienced on Wednesday. When I was done sharing my prayer and the subsequent confirmations, his jaw literally dropped. He was quiet for a while and finally, nodding his head, said, "The only question is logistics. I will have to think about it and let you know." The next day, we went to church and to a single adult dinner that night. Tuesday, we got together for another session before I went to work. We did not get asked to be the witness couple this time, but 3 times in 1 week has to be some kind of a record, especially for an unmarried couple. Now, thanks to updates for social distancing and technology, it isn't even something that participants are invited to do anymore. When we arrived in the Celestial Room, we sat down on a couch and Dan said, "So, the answer is yes. Do you think President Baird would be willing to marry us this Saturday, the 22nd? I laugh and I say, "I don't know, but if he is, you better go get the license today because it takes 3 days for it to be legitimate in Maryland." President Baird had to shuffle his schedule a little to accommodate us. He also had to make a phone call to the office of the First Presidency in Salt Lake to get approval to marry us in a county outside his boundaries. Dan says it was fun to see him make that phone call. A comparison would be to see a church leader picking up a phone and calling the Pope, and to hear the person on the other line say, "Oh yes, President Baird, how are you today?" Just a side note, but I kind of want to mention the caliber of man that President Baird was by the Lord's standards. He was responsible for the area that encompassed the White House. If Mitt Romney had been elected, he would have gone to President Baird for his temple recommend. This area includes some of the most influential people in the world, including the House and Senate and all of their staff. There are few people for whom I have more respect than President Baird. There is likely no other higher concentration of power and influence in the world than in the Washington, D.C. state. By the time Dan arrived at the Frederick County Clerk's office to apply for the marriage license, it was 15 minutes before closing, and the gentleman answering Dan's questions was ready to go home. When Dan was told he needed my address, he realized he didn't know it. He called the temple to see if he could get through to me. The machines in the laundry room are loud, and cell phones don't work in the temple basement, even if they could be heard. By sheer fortune, I heard the office phone and picked it up. It was Dan asking for my address. Once he got my address, he went back in and asked the gentleman if there was anything else he needed in order to be able to submit the request the next day. Again, fortune smiled, and the gentleman and another gentleman took the time to stay beyond when they should have been off work to help get the paperwork done and submitted so we would be able to get married on Saturday. Miracles never cease. That Friday night, we drove to the chapel in Montgomery Village where we would be married the next day. We sat and talked in the parking lot for a couple of hours. He sang a couple of songs to me. That Was a River, This Is an Ocean, and One Boy, One Girl, a song about love and twins. Both songs touched me deeply. Saturday morning came. The weather was overcast and it started to sprinkle. Just as I got in the door, it became a deluge. I could see Dan pulling up in the parking lot through the window of the office where President Baird would marry us. I could tell Dan was waiting for a break in the downpour. A slight break finally came, and he made a run for it. 2 weeks is a pretty short time to get to know each other. President Baird talked about getting to know one another as time went on. You were going to discover things about each other that might come as a surprise. For instance, pointing to Dan's hand, you might realize he's missing part of his finger. We chuckled. Neither one of us assumed we wouldn't still have challenges. What our new relationship did for us was give us a companion to go through the challenges with. After the ceremony, fortune provided an unexpected sweetness to the day. Another couple happened to be having a wedding reception that evening. They were busy decorating the cultural hall. President Baird asked if they would mind if we used their backdrop to take a picture, and they graciously consented. It was a tender moment of celebration. Something I haven't really discussed yet is the surprising fact that both Dan and I were in D.C. from Utah. I'd been living in Stansbury Park when I came out, and Dan's home was in Mount Pleasant. Our paths seem to have come close to crossing a couple of times historically, and we've often thought how doing a timeline might help us see how close we came to meeting earlier, though the futility of it makes it kind of pointless. Part of the reason we met in the temple on July 8th is because Dan had come the previous week to give his daughter McKenna a blessing prior to what was supposed to have been a hysterectomy for a very young woman. After taking her to pre-op, they came back much sooner than expected with several sets of images. The doctor held them up and said, "These images were taken before. You can see she's completely riddled with endometriosis. These images were taken just now. I can't explain it. This never happens. As you can see, there's very few spots, and none that would warrant surgery to remove them or to perform a hysterectomy. The only thing that had happened in between those two sets of images, Dan's priesthood blessing given to McKenna. Often it is a simple faith in our Father in heaven that would make all the difference in the world." Chapter 11. Taking one for the team. It may not be a popular belief, but there are times I believe in our pre-earth life we chose to experience something difficult in order to take one for the team. A perfect example is my sister Kay. She was only 48 when her husband T passed away. At the time, the fourth of her 5 sons was serving a mission in South Korea. On the morning of his dad's passing, or actually it must have been on the morning of his life celebration, this sweet young man said he woke to the smell of fresh cut hay, dirt, and sweat. A familiar smell working the farm with his father, but one that had no source in South Korea. He felt his father with him, encouraging him to continue to serve despite the pain of loss, a pain he knew his dad had experienced as a young missionary himself. T's father and 2 brothers were killed in a plane crash while he was on his mission. He returned to his mission to continue to serve after going home for their funerals. Several years after this son returned home from his mission to South Korea, he and his mom, my sister, were talking about the hay, sweat, and dew he had smelled that were associated with working on the farm with his dad. My sister commented that T had the same experience when his dad had died while he was serving a mission. T had smelled his dad's cologne and felt his dad supporting him as he was giving a lesson about the plan of salvation to some people interested in learning about the gospel. This son had never known that he and his dad had both been given the same type of witness about the passing of their fathers by smelling the presence of their fathers with them. That was an additional testimony to my sister and to her son of God's love for them. A few years after T had passed, a well-meaning neighbor had given my sister's number, without her knowledge or permission, to a divorcee at the church she attended. The divorcee had called and they talked for a while and then set a date for lunch the next day. After midnight that night, her youngest son called saying he was on his way to the ER with severe stomach pain and nausea. After being seen, he was scheduled for an appendectomy. Kay went to be with him in the hospital. She texted the fellow she was supposed to meet for lunch, explaining that she would not be able to make it due to her son being in the hospital. He never responded to her text, but at the appointed time for lunch, he texted and said, "Did you forget about our date?" She responded that she had not forgotten and that she had sent him a text regarding her son's appendectomy. He didn't ask how her son was doing. He didn't say he was sorry to hear about his surgery. He only said, "Yeah, I had to get my appendix out too." Kay wasn't too keen on rescheduling the date, but she didn't like the thought of hurting his feelings, so she asked my opinion of the situation and if she should reschedule. I was surprised she couldn't see the writing on the wall. "Are you kidding? No? Seriously, I think the appendectomy was your son taking one for the team to save you from getting involved with a narcissist and a martinet. I'm 100% confident that before your son came to Earth, those circumstances were illustrated and he agreed to take a hit so you wouldn't have to." She agreed and was grateful for her son's willingness to take one for the team. In a similar way, our daughter Cheyenne took one for the team in August of 2021. To preface this story, my husband and I had gone to the temple to celebrate our 5th anniversary. At 3 different points during our worship, I heard the following words enter my mind: "Dan isn't going to make it a year." As you can imagine, it upset me immensely. When I arrived in the celestial room, I prayed, "Lord, I don't know what to do with that information. Dan has been sick so much of his life. I understand if he's come to a point where you have to take him. I don't want you to take him. I would rather see him cross that line into the millennial world where there's no more sickness and be with him when that happens. At the same time, I hate to see him suffer more than he has to. All I have to say is if you have to take him, please let him have a chance to see the family in Virginia first, please." That was a Tuesday. On Thursday, we got a call from Cheyenne. She'd fallen down some stairs while helping care for some of our grandchildren and had broken her foot. She's a bookkeeper, paramedic, and has been in school for nursing, along with caring for Archie and Eva, her rescue dogs. She was in dire straits and needed our help. We got in the car Saturday and arrived the following Tuesday. While we were there, our daughter Tristan found out that one of her children had been accepted into an after-school program while the other had not. She was also going through an ugly divorce where her children had seen their father beat their dogs and threatened to do the same to them if they were disobedient. Not to mention, they had seen him try to kill their mother on several occasions. We were able to be there for her while she faced him in court. When we realized that we could help with the children after school and with their transportation, we decided to settle in for the school year. In order to do that, Dan established a primary care doctor that could oversee the meds he has to take. One of the standard tests done is a PSA. Dan had done one just the month before we came out, and his levels were perfect. This time, they came back elevated, and with a Gleason score between 8 and 9. Biopsies were taken, and the samples were positive for malignancy. After surgery and tests were done, the cancer had spread to the bladder neck and through 40% of the organ. If it had really gone from 0 in May to 40% involved in January, it's not impossible it was a rare form of prostate cancer that might actually have been terminal that year. If Cheyenne hadn't broken her foot, it is quite possible that Dan may not have survived the year after all. We say she took one for the team, for us, saving Dan from his potential demise within the year, but also to help her sister and give us a chance to spend time with our grandchildren until they both got into the after-school program. Cheyenne took one for the team that blessed many all around. Chapter 12, Why We Vote for You. When I think about the idea of E50 for DC, being elected in 50 states for Washington, D.C., I think of the 333 million people in our nation that are all amazing. Even though a number of those are just babies, I still think, yeah, just about any one of them would be better suited or likely to be elected in all 50 states than me. Just saying, considering that 39% of women aged 25 and older and 36% of men the same age have completed a bachelor's degree or more as their highest level education attainment. I would say that at least in the Department of Education, that comparison alone leaves me bested. Granted, the only requirement for presidency is to have been born on American soil. So considering I share the same birth date with President Obama, that's about the only good company I can claim as far as presidential candidacy goes. The list of self-effacing attributes, character traits, or experiences is way longer than any singular quality that in any stretch of the imagination might possibly qualify as a possible validation for election. As a matter of fact, I am completely convinced that if we knew each of you in your premortal state, we would be voting for you as the gods and goddesses that you are. Not only do I know that any one of you of sufficient age to run for politics is of amazing and regal spiritual genetics, I also know that our upcoming generation is even more dynamic and poised to raise the level of light on this planet in exponential ways. I've seen it and felt it in ways that can't be expressed in our limited language. Holding a brand new baby testifies to me every time. Every one of my children is more beautiful and brilliant and intelligent than I have ever hoped to be. Not to any credit of my own as their mother, but credit goes to Heavenly Father in saving the best generation to come to earth when we need them the most. We do need heroes, and they are here. They are you. Somewhere inside, you know that's you. You do come from royalty. You have gifts you can't explain, and you know you are destined for greatness. You can't help it. It is in your DNA. This world hasn't seen anything yet when it comes to advancement in intelligence and technology. And I'm not talking about AI. I'm talking about SI, spiritual intelligence. It has been said that we use 10% of our brains, or less. Just wait until Mother Earth gives birth to the new world just waiting to break forth. We are still living in the dark ages compared to what is just around the corner. And statistically speaking, I know billions of us are going to experience it. You are here for a reason, because you do quantifiably make this world a brighter place. More on Mother Earth coming next. Chapter 13. Mother Earth is ready to give birth. La madre tierra está lista para dar la luz. The pain of the world's transformation is like a baby being born. I think one of the tragic belief systems in life that has been perpetuated is mankind blaming God for the horrible things that occur. Why would God allow X, Y, or Z to happen if he really loves us? Another tragic pattern of thinking is, well, X, Y, or Z happened that was horrible and awful, so those people who suffered must have done something terribly wrong sometime in their lives and are being punished. For the record, I choose not to believe either of those. As a parent, there's never been once that I've seen one of my children fall or get hurt and thought, serves you right, you little X, Y, or Z. I've also never in my life moved an object in front of a baby learning to walk and hoped that it would trip and fall. When they did trip and fall, which was inevitable, I was right there picking them up and loving on them and soothing their tears. I try not to give too much thought to where negative events or trains of thought originate. To me, it's trying to figure out the why is a waste of time. I'd rather focus on, okay, that happened, now what? How do we handle what got put in front of us? How do we problem solve and move forward? Is there a takeaway? How many apocalyptic movies have ever been produced? Hundreds? Of all the nightmare end-of-the-world movies ever made, I would guesstimate that virtually 100% of them focused on, serves you right, you horrible human beings plaguing the earth, with an occasional positive message validating that the compassionate team is the only team that survives. I personally would like to propose that the apocalyptic events destined to happen are less of a punishment than we might all think. but more of the natural and beautiful transition of things, like the birth of a baby. As a mother having given birth 9 times and gone through 4 miscarriages, the pain is impossible to describe. We just know when a man tries to describe his pain as imagining it might be like going through labor, that there's no way for him to honestly know. When a happy, healthy baby is the result, there's also no way to express the indescribable heavenly joy. I remember after my first son was born, feeling like I was walking around in a daze for weeks, wondering who could possibly go through that experience twice. And yet, so many of us have. And we do because it is so worth it. There truly is nothing to compare with holding a brand new baby, looking into their eyes, knowing we are holding something so pure and so recently in heaven. That is multiplied when by some miracle they look back into our loving eyes and smile with the purest love and gratitude for having been given the chance to come to earth. I know I am very Pollyanna, but I'm not so Pollyanna that I don't know how painful this life can be and how difficult it is to parent. That's not really my point. I'm just saying that all of that pain has value and is worth going through for the end result, a precious new life. The comparison and illustration I want to make has to do with giving Heavenly Father the benefit of the doubt that the awful things that have been prophesied in Revelations are not about objects being put in our way to hinder us from learning to walk, or that are happening because He thinks we are all horrible humans who need to be punished. Some of the things that are awful, that might feel like punishment and leave us asking what we've done wrong, may simply not have an answer. Sometimes someone really is to blame, but it isn't our Heavenly Father. I would like to propose that the upheavals and devastations destined to occur and that are occurring now are not only a metaphor for the earth going through labor pains, but may in all true actuality be a physical transition as well as a spiritual one. Earth is a fertile ground. Mankind is the spiritual and physical seed that inseminates her with more life and abundance. After thousands and thousands of years, the gestation period is complete, and the labor has already begun. It is just like the pains a mother in labor experiences when she is ready to bring forth life, or bring a child into the light. She experiences a rushing forth of waters, physical contractions, ripping, tearing, blood, mud, tears, swearing, and sometimes we can even hear a primordial scream. It can be absolutely terrifying. Mother Earth is very surely in the throes of a powerful labor. Right now, we are in the darkness, and the water has broken. Contractions and quakes will happen. We feel the fire, and more scary things may happen than we care to imagine. The world will experience parallel labor pains, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, mudslides, volcanic activity, eruptions, storms, tornadoes, hail, thunder, lightning, fire. These are not aimed like missiles at evil people who need to be punished. From where our Father in heaven sits, we all look the same to Him. He loves us passionately, and with the sacrifice of His only begotten Son, intends to bring us all back home if we choose to follow Him. The upheaval we see in the world is the natural transition of our moving from an antiquated era and transforming into a new one. Very soon we will enter the light of the prophesied millennial world and Zion, where sweetness, perpetual abundance, and well-being exists. This world was never meant to stay in the phase of one that would kill its creator. Like fertilizer on a garden, that phase had its purpose in our growth. But now that phase is ready to pass. A time for death and suffering is almost behind us. A time for perpetual hope and renewal is within our grasp. There are those of us living now who will witness the crossing of the line between this world of death and illness into a world of healing and never-ending longevity. Just as destruction has been prophesied, so too are the truths of the prophecies regarding the blessed state of what is to come after what might better be called a metamorphosis. In my faith, I believe there are phases of growth and transition to this world, just as in any growing organism. Just as we go through phases of gestation and transition, fetus, embryo, newborn, infant, child, juvenile, adult, senior, unembodied, quickened, resurrected, et al. Mother Earth has her states of being and transition that are parallel to the states of growth for humanity. The current state in Earth's evolution is that of the telestial phase. Human gestation has 3 prenatal stages: germinal, embryonic, and fetal. I would like to try and illustrate. We on Earth are in a phase equivalent to the end of the fetal phase and ready for birth. The horrific pain experienced during the years of apocalyptic dirge, post-financial boom, and during the premillennial establishment of Zion can easily be compared to the labor a mother goes through when bringing a child into the light, as in the Spanish expression for giving birth. The term for giving birth in Spanish is dando a luz. The direct translation of dar a luz into English means to give light. Gestation is 40 weeks. The numerology of 40 is the amount of time it takes to reach perfection. The word perfect means through faith. The number 40 represents trials and testing. The earth is in her 40th week, so to speak. Mankind, her offspring, we are in our 40th week, ready to be given the light. Somehow, through the terror of our coming into life and light, there is a peace and calmness that can carry us into a beautiful new existence and a beautiful new world. The pressure for us and the intensity and pain is greatest as we enter and exit the birthing canal. The waters will break and the land will crack wide open. We've grown in the dark for 40 weeks of the Lord's time, and the brightness is overwhelming, and the warm air will hit our lungs with a force that takes our breath away. It will all hurt, and we will cry as we gasp in the new experience of fresh air. This time, we will weep for joy. This journey of pain will have been worth it. Soon we will be in her arms, her warm and loving arms. Soon we will be nourished with the sweetness coming straight from her breast. Soon we will look into her eyes, and we will smile in gratitude for her sacrifice in bringing us forth. Her blessed familiarity will fill us with an unspeakable joy, and we will know that the unbearable pain will soon be forgotten. And in that instance, all will truly be well. Those who crossed through that experience of Mother Earth's transition will have the opportunity to remind our young ones what life used to be like before we were given the light, and as we grew to become what we will be then. Chapter 14, Fantasies. To preface this section, I very much wanted to make this whole book a type of War of the Worlds fantasy of sorts, but in a way that it would feel more like C.S. Lewis had written it. Not that I fancy myself of that caliber by any stretch of the imagination. I can relate more to John Steinbeck, who claims not to be a great writer, just a great rewriter. Again, I'm not claiming to be anything like him either, other than being inspired by the fact that if it's okay for John Steinbeck, it must definitely be okay that I take multitudes of iterations before I can get anything even minimally palatable to read. I almost said anything palatable put on paper, but I just realized most of these words have come to be by swiping my phone. I'm not even typing on a computer keyboard right now, can you believe it? I'm not sure there is any likelihood at all that these words will ever even make it to a paper version. One thing I have discovered on this journey of trying to put in black and white something potentially worth reading is I'm no novelist. I look at authors like Jerry and Dallas Jenkins and Stephanie Meyer and think those people are true powerhouse influencers. I would have to have an immense amount of patience and have read about 1 million more books than I've read to even pretend I have the capacity to write the type of readable stories that have captured the attention of soon-to-be billions the way they have. I, on the other hand, would love to tell these next stories with the same type of breadth and dimension and fascinating detail, but I can't even begin to draw the stories the way I want to. Some of the ideas in the fantasy that I want to share with you come from an NDE recorded in Visions of Glory by John Pontius. I'd recommend you read it, as it will definitely flesh out the vision with greater detail. That having been said, and as I've mentioned before, daydreaming about the day of the Lord's promise brings me so much hope and joy. But I'm going to say up front that this following tale will not do his advent justice. I do hope maybe you'll still get a slim glimpse of what we all potentially have to look forward to. Someone will experience what I'm about to share with you. Hopefully it will be us. Monday, December 17th, the year 2040. Statistically and literally speaking, the 2024 presidential election should never have been won by write-in, but it was. 3 presidential elections in a row, a national miracle happened. This occurred just 9 years before all Hades broke loose. The miracle happened twice for Madam President Johnson in 2024 and 2028, and then it happened for the first gentleman in 2032. He became our 4th president with the last name Johnson, his wife being the 3rd. They were the first couple to have a spouse elected into the office in a successive term. If the world hadn't fallen into the dramatic changes brought on by both chaos as well as beautiful form of communal autonomy, Mr. President Johnson, Mr. being used now to distinguish him from Madam President, would most likely have been elected again in 2036. As it was, 2032 was the final U.S. election that ever took place in the States. That election wasn't long after miraculous and beautifully powerful changes started taking place in the world, and it was right before apocalyptic devastations occurred, altering life as we currently know it. There were laws against an election of this type, which laws had been put in place attempting to prevent it. Penalties and/or fines were levied in many states for some members of the Electoral College who cast their votes outside their party affiliations in order to side with the popular vote of the people. It also shouldn't have happened at all in 2024. Madam President Johnson was literally a last-minute unregistered write-in that swept the nation with unprecedented and overwhelming support, and with very little logic to support it. It was an instance of spiritual passion and harmony in every state of the Union. Having this type of unity in all 50 states for a presidential election was never seen or heard of before. It was an expression of belief in God and His miracles. It was a belief in one another and humanity. It was an expression of belief in us, unity, sanctity, abundance. The nation spoke and voted in the belief of the reality that despite the fear of ugly things threatening ahead, there is so much more to look forward to. We stand together, unified in our faith, in one another, and the knowledge that when we serve each other, we are in the service of our God. He is a trustworthy advocate and the rewarder of mankind. Now, 16 years later, even with Christmas a week away, no one is surprised that it's a warm, quiet night for a northern mountain ski resort ghost town called Sun Valley. Snow has long since stopped coming. Global warming? Yes, but in a much more dramatic way than anyone could have predicted. The floods and earthquakes in 33 had created a new Grand Canyon, which was wrenched from the countryside between what used to be the Great Lakes clear down to New Orleans. For at least 3 years, literally no living thing could be found from north to south and for miles up and down what some call the Mississippi Canyon. Others began calling it New Zion's Canyon. New Jerusalem is a massive new city. It sprang up virtually overnight at the headwaters of a sweet restorative fountain which flows from the north end of that chasm. It produces more than 3 million gallons of fresh water every day, washing Earth of the grunge and degradation that once weighed her down. Those who are willing to do what it takes to get closest to the headwaters not only quench their thirst, a rampant malady, but they are also healed of their infirmities and given youthful strength in miraculous ways. For now, the strength of the water's benefits weaken as the distance increases away from the source. Those people that do experience the change are very much like what the President Johnson experienced in 2030 for all the world to see, and which those living outside Zion can't manage to believe. While peace, health, and prosperity are spreading across the globe at an exponential pace, there are those in pockets of disbelief, clinging to empty traditions. Because of the quakes, storms, and floods, Chicago is gone, Baton Rouge is gone, almost 1,100 miles of land, a mile wide, and in some places a mile deep, had swept into the Gulf of Mexico. A massive new island between Texas and Cancun formed, with what resembles a giant moat around it. The impressive formation, larger than Texas, would be something for the average man to behold if there were still planes or satellites that could go high enough to capture the image. That type of technology is not only long gone, but is now considered archaic. More recently, the engineering of today is based on much more spiritual science defined by celestial calculus. Right after the quakes, though, only shipping vessels had remained as somewhat viable and rare international transportation. Horses were the wealthy man's ride, while personal portals and a skilled form of levitation have become the spiritual man's means of going and doing the Lord's work. Talents, which the universities of Zion teach to those patient and dedicated enough to learn through Urim and Thummim. Spiritual intelligence, both western and eastern coasts are gone. Let me reread that last sentence. It says, and dedicated enough to learn through Urim and Thummim, spiritual intelligence, period. Both western and eastern coasts are gone. LA to Seattle and Miami to New York, all major coastlines were broken up by the floods and quakes into desolate islands. The quakes happened across the country and rippled around the world. The quake causing the new Grand Canyon divided the United States into western United States and eastern United States, which created some political intrigue until a more pure form of government, if that's what you want to call it, became the way of being in New Jerusalem. Italics are used on the term government, as those in the community of New Jerusalem have simply adopted correct principles of universally beneficial behavior, and therefore they govern themselves by following God's laws. It's the antithesis of both anarchy as well as government, really. It's the way life in this new world was always meant to become. Many new cities of Zion sprang up all across the world, not only by default, as the world couldn't function without dramatic cooperation, but also fueled by the hope that living in peace really could become the norm. Outside the cities, devastation was worldwide. Monetary systems had devolved to simple bartering. Wars erupted everywhere for resources. Military regimes were the rule for those who couldn't learn to adapt and share. Through natural attrition, those at war faded away as those who chose peace had the strength of God to sustain them. Within months after the global earthquakes hit, a man-made 18-hour plague wreaked havoc. We thought COVID-19 was bad, but that was just a systems test. The man-made pandemic, which came, was called the 18-hour plague because that is how quickly 50% of those who contracted the disease died after becoming infected with it. It would start with small, painful purple blisters on the hand or face that quickly grew to cover the body. Those eventually erupted, spewing deadly contagious ooze. For those who would die, it often caused blindness and dysphagia, and even asphyxiation, as the tongue would often explode from the growth of the pustules inside the mouth and nose. It was horrible to experience. Not everyone died, and almost as unbearable to witness. No family was without the sickness, nor the loss. After all these and many other desolations took their toll, only a fourth of the global population remained after 7 relatively short years. That seemed like an eternity. Humanity was dramatically reduced in what now seems like overnight. Looking back on the last 14 years between 2026 and today, 2040, hindsight shows this story is similar to Pharaoh's dreams and the Old Testament, interpreted by Joseph in Egypt. In part, thanks to a nationwide commitment to unity and sanctity, an abundance of immeasurable display was manifested for 7 great years of prosperity from mid-2025 through 2032. In 2033, 7 years of tragedy broke out. It was very much like the 7 thin, sickly cows and 7 stalks of corn of Joseph's dream, gobbling up the 7 healthy stalks of corn and the 7 healthy cattle too. Now, in 2040, the tide has turned again, and peace is beginning to settle more profusely across the land. Pockets of division linger, but they are more the exception than the rule. Where prosperity reigns, money is no more. Abundance is freely shared, and all are wealthy beyond imagination. Here is seen the strength and difference between gifts freely given versus taxes being levied and enforced. No truly pure communal society can flourish through imposed or militated mandates. The choice to give must be of one's own free will. Tonight, the 17th of December 2040, we honor my father on his 105th birthday. 16 years ago on his birthday, the Electoral College performed a miracle on behalf of the hopes of all of us. Today we have joy in the fact that not only did both he and my mother survive the sorrows of the 7 years of apocalypse, but also that those who survived seemed to live to unprecedented ages. It's truly reminiscent of the length of life our forefathers experienced in the Old Testament. But my parents aren't the oldest. My husband's mother is 114, and our prophet, Russell M. Nelson, turned 116 on September 9th. My triplets turned 10 today on my father's birthday, and the miracle there is that not only was I 62 when they were conceived, my husband was 72. We're not the oldest couple to ever conceive, but one has to admit it is miraculous nevertheless, especially considering the change that had to happen to make it possible. Let me tell you about it. We had gone to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary of the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was Saturday, April 6th, 2030. My husband had always struggled with health challenges. He literally has thousands and thousands of pages of medical history. At age 66, he had experienced 68 surgical procedures, including fusions of his neck and spine, removal of his gallbladder, appendix, colon, tonsils, prostate, a fundoplication, one of his fingers, a replacement of a knee, multiple surgeries on his shoulder, both elbows, dual carpal tunnel, procedures to insert PICC lines, tunnel lines, ports, placement of feeding tubes, creation of a new bladder and urostomy, colostomy, and had suffered a TBI and damage to his vagus nerve, which resulted in autonomic visceral neuropathy. He had a malfunctioned IVC filter, a compressed median arcuate ligament, osteoporosis, a blood clotting disorder, and rheumatoid arthritis, honestly, only to name a few. He was on a 24/7 feeding tube and IV lactated ringers, and 3 liters of oxygen at night. I would crush 23 scripts and 8 supplements to go through his tube twice a day. Compression on his spine caused weakness in his legs, and he needed an electric wheelchair to maintain some semblance of independence. Something miraculous happened that Saturday. When we woke up on Sunday morning, all we could do was laugh. There was a pile of hardware in bed with us. I took one look at Dan and knew a dramatic change had taken place. Even with all his health issues, to me, he had always been the strongest man I ever knew. Now, here beside me lay Clark Kent. His hair was thick, his eyes glistened at me without his glasses, his smiling white teeth were his own, his tunnel line lay on the bed next to his feeding tube, and both ostomy bags. I joyfully celebrated the fact that this would be the last night I would ever need to wash the bedding because of a malfunction of their purpose. The wire embraces from his neck were on the bed. The scars on his neck, shoulder, elbows, knees, back, thighs, and hands were all gone. The hardware from his knee was on the bed. His finger had grown back. His toenails had grown back. Other functionalities were obvious. I think I could tell because I had changed too, and he was enjoying my change as much as I had been enjoying his. I had changed into what can only be described as my 29-year-old self, which equates to a difference of some 60 pounds, no wrinkles or stretch marks or spider veins. We laughed and cried and held each other for days. It really shouldn't be any wonder that we conceived triplets. We had pretended for decades that we would get to be some of the fortunate ones that would experience crossing over from the telestial world into the terrestrial world or millennial world, where we had been promised that illness, death, sadness, and poverty would be no more. It wasn't a worldwide transition. It happened a little bit at a time, but for some unknown reason, Dan and I were chosen to experience the change in a way that the whole world would get to see. Not everyone would believe their eyes, but those who did knew the change would happen for them as well, in the Lord's time. All thanks to the atonement of his Son, the Messiah. It's a little hard to say what the Lord's timing was, but for those who believed, it began to happen more and more often, and with a consistency that became the rule rather than the exception. The light was beginning to permeate the world like a dimming switch being slowly turned up a fraction at a time. What we used to call miracles came to be the expected experience for those who loved the Lord. It never got old, and it was always a moment to celebrate. But there actually came a point when everyone was healed, full of energy, and full of their youth. When our children were born, they came without pain and grew without illness or the challenges we had known growing up. Intelligence and knowledge were pure and free to all. We thought we had known beauty and joy before, but they were just shadows compared to what we now experienced in this new world. It still took work, but in comparison to the efforts required before, it was pure grace. While conceiving triplets at 62 was my greatest dream, 1 boy and 2 girls, one of the greatest excitements for Dan was obviously regaining his health. He had always been a freight train and virtually impossible to keep down, even with all the challenges that he experienced physically. This change for him was like removing 1,000-pound kryptonite weights that he had been dragging around behind him. He literally became a titan. As a teenager, he had played baseball. He'd been recruited at age 16 for his 100-mile-an-hour fastball. His father, Jim, was a wise man who served in World War II and served as the chief of procurement afterward. He is another man who had taken one for the team in so many rights. He rightly encouraged Dan to continue and finish high school. Ultimately, Dan gave up his professional career in baseball to serve a mission. When his father saw Dan's sacrifice for the Lord, he became Dan's first baptism. After Dan fully regained his health and vitality on April 6, 2030, and while I continued my duties as head of state, Dan decided to pursue his favorite youthful pastime. He had no trouble, as the first gentleman, talking the coach of the Washington Nationals into letting him play a little game of catch with the boys. When their gloves came up smoking, they decided they wouldn't mind having a 72-year-old man give them a hand on the team. Long story short, they ended up going to the World Series again, which the team won in no small part due to several of the games being closeout perfect games. In the final game, he struck out all 27 batters in the 9 innings, something that had never been done in the World Series since 1956 by Don Larson. It was a glorious time, and the nation eagerly awaited every game Dan would pitch for the next 2 years, right up until he was elected the final president of the United States in 2032. Chapter 15. Fears of Cheerios. I would love to expound more on all these things, but I don't really know how. I know the Lord doesn't need my help to bring to light the glories we all have to look forward to in the upcoming years. My sharing these things with you is equivalent to Dad sitting with his baby while she sits in her high chair, offering him a soggy Cheerio. Thank you so much. I know what I have to offer God is nothing more than a soggy Cheerio, but here I am anyway. I'm so happy to share my already licked and spit back out mushiness, but I offer it to my daddy on Father's Day. It most likely needs to just be wiped up and washed off because there's ultimately so little substance here. But oh, how I want to share my Cheerio with my dad. What's precious is he leans down and actually takes this mushy little offering of mine and laps it up like a meal fit for a king. He makes me feel like I have something truly worthy to share. But that's just my dad. He loves me, and he likes me to know it. I regularly wonder why, but his helping me get this crazy little Cheerio written and put out there makes me feel good, if for no other reason than it's all I have to share, and I've waited so long to share it. Now that it's done, maybe I can move on to something else. Maybe I'll actually go get my RN. I'm kind of old for that, but who knows where I'll go from here. I do like art. Maybe I'll start to draw or paint again. I've been told my writing tends to be didactic, and that trying to write what I've had on my heart for so long isn't readable. Thanks to the internet and free Google blogs, I guess it doesn't really matter. It's done, and it feels good. If anyone actually reads this, hallelujah. Chapter 15. Patience, Joy, and Gratitude. Before I go, I want to share a couple more gifts that I feel like the Lord gave me outside the fantasy related above. At the end of last year, 2023, between 3 weeks in October and 15 days in December when he got his new bladder, Dan had over a month's worth of hospital stays. I helped administer 2.5 months of IV antibiotics to fight off the sepsis that plagued him until he made it to surgery. We were also afflicted with some serious financial reversals that left us trying to figure things out on half of the income we could barely make work before we'd lost it. More significantly, some major things were happening with some of our children that were almost more than I could bear. At a seriously low point, I bore my soul to the Lord. I offered to fast until some of these things could be resolved, particularly in regards to Dan and my children. I've fasted before at times of trial and found peace and relief. This time, the Lord heard me, and again, he answered. I know you can fast. I appreciate that. How about instead, let me give you something? Let me give you 3 things. Let me give you patience. Let me give you joy. Let me give you gratitude. If the Lord is willing to give these things to me, I know He is willing to give these things to you. He doesn't give a gift to one of His children without making that same gift available to someone else that might want or need it as well. These are not things I have to exert myself to do. These are just feelings. These are just feelings I can open my heart to and receive. As I do, my heart is filled. Patience, joy, and gratitude are my new mantra. I would love for you to experience the gift of these things too, if you will. My sister thinks I've won a spiritual lottery with this gift, but I know it is a blessing for anyone who desires it. Just receive the joy that is there for you in patience and gratitude. All will be made right by the one who suffered so these things might be. I share these things with you in all humility, in trust of Him, in His name, even Jesus Christ. Amen. As man approaches God, he is enlightened. We consider that God has created man with a mind capable of instruction, and a faculty which may be enlarged in proportion to the heed and diligence given to the light communicated from heaven to the intellect. The nearer man approaches perfection, the clearer are his views, and the greater his enjoyments, till he has overcome the evils of this life and lost every desire for sin, and, like the ancients, arrives at that point of faith where he is wrapped in power and glory of his Maker and is caught up to dwell with him. But we consider that this is a station to which no man ever arrived in a moment. He must have been instructed in the government and laws of that kingdom by proper degrees, until his mind is capable in some measure of comprehending the propriety, justice, equality, and consistency of the same. It is necessary for men to receive an understanding concerning the laws of the heavenly kingdom before they are permitted to enter it. We mean the celestial glory. Joseph Smith. My prayer for us. Lord, we vote in gratitude for the voice you've given us. Lord, we vote in gratitude for the privilege to stand up for what's right, a privilege that you've given us. Lord, we vote in gratitude for the hope you give us. We vote for you. We vote for unity. Vote for us. Government by the people, for the people, ordained by God. That is us. Unity, sanctity, abundance for all. That's USA. United States of America. 5% of the world population, 95% of the influence. What are we doing with the power of us? What good we can do as us. In God we trust. Hooray, USA.